Salam and Afakir, peace and love. Anyone familiar with this book? Ethiopia stretches her hand unto God. Imperial Ethiopia's unique symbols, structures, and role in the modern world by Gregory R. Copley. With a foreword by His Imperial Highness Prince Haile Selassie, Haile Selassie. I'm going to read a brief biography of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I. Emperor Haile Selassie I was born as Lij Taferi Mokanen on July 23, 1892, in the town of Ejazagora in the Haraj province, some 18 miles outside the city of Harar, Ethiopia. He was the son of Ras Mokanen, governor of Harar, under his kinsman, Emperor Menelik II. Ras Mokanen, a Shoa Amarin noble, was married to an Oromo, Yashimabet, who died 2 years after Lij Taferi's birth. In a significant break with precedence, Lij Taferi Mokanen was raised with an understanding of world affairs and with an exposure to the outside world. He was to become the first emperor of Ethiopia to have traveled extensively abroad. Ras Mokanen, and therefore Lij Taferi Mokanen, were directly of the Solomonic line, as was Emperor Menelik himself and Taferi Mokanen's great-great-grandfather Negus Haile Selassie of Shoa. King Haile Selassie had already made treaties with foreign states, including Queen Victoria's Britain. Lij Taferi was unusually, for the period, brought up with both a strong education in Shoan Amharic traditions and in Western history, languages, and statecraft. He was named Dejazmach, literally keeper of the door, the equivalent of the title of count in Western terms, for part of Haraj province at the age of 13 in 1904, only about a year before his father's death. The governorship of Harar and the army that went with it went to another, Taferi's half-brother Yelma, when Ras Mokanen died, and Lij Taferi Mokanen was named to the lesser governorship of Salali. But because of palace politics, he was forced even to administer this governorship from the confines of Emperor Menelik's palace in Addis Ababa, where he learned firsthand the art of political maneuver. Emperor Menelik, one of Lij Taferi's supporters, suffered a severe stroke in 1908, and Taferi was exiled to the southern frontier area where he served as governor of Sidamo province. There, however, he had an army of 3,000. Emperor Menelik, the year before, had designated his 12-year-old grandson, Lij Ayasu, as his heir apparent. Emperor Menelik's wife, Empress Taitu, promoted the interests of Zoditu, her daughter, at that point. However, Yelma died and the governorship of Harar again became vacant. So in 1910, with the loyalty of various armies, including Harar and princes, Taferi, with the Shoa Amarin nobility, was able to insist that Empress Taitu devote her energies to nursing the ailing emperor, with day-to-day management of the empire handled by Ras Tassama as regent. Ras Tassama was one of the most powerful Rases, commanding an extensive army of his own. He had been the traditional advisor-guardian to Lij Ayasu. But Tassama died in 1911, and Lij Ayasu began a determined bid for the throne. Emperor Menelik died in 1913, but Ayasu still could not be crowned. His apparent conversion to Islam, the religion into which his father was born, discredited him in the eyes of the monophysite Ethiopian Orthodox Church and Shoan nobles. In 1916, they confirmed Zoditu as empress and the 25-year-old Ras Taferi as supreme regent, heir apparent crown prince. He was to remain regent for the next 13 years, a period during which, as de facto ruler of Ethiopia, he began the transformation of Ethiopia into a modern state in the international sense. Lij Ayasu attempted during this period to press his claim to the throne and was arrested in 1921 and died 12 years later. Empress Zoditu had, in response to the growing power and popularity of the regent and crown prince, crowned Ras Taferi as Negus on September 7, 1928, which is the equivalent of the Ethiopian date Maskaram 27, 1921. It was the first occasion that an emperor or ruling empress had granted the title of Negus in the Ethiopian context. Previously, the title Negus had been used only by the kings of constituent states of Ethiopia, such as Negus of Shoa, etc. Empress Zewditu herself, resentful of the growing popularity of the region in 1930, sent her husband's sizable army against Tafari's forces, but the army was immediately crushed and her husband killed. But on April 2nd, 2 days after Negus Tafari's victory against her husband, Empress Zewditu died. As regent and Negus, Ras Tafari had undertaken the modernization of Ethiopia on a significant scale, bringing the country into the League of Nations in 1923. The application had been lodged in 1919. Abolishing slavery in 1923, the trigger to admission into the League of Nations. Creating schools, universities, and generally began the development of a modern national infrastructure. The sudden death of Empress Zewditu led to the coronation of Negus Tafari as emperor on November 2nd, 1930, to Kemp 23rd, 1922 on the Ethiopian calendar, and his elevation to the highest throne, for which he adopted the throne name Haile Selassie I, was the cause for further consolidation of his programs and reforms. He founded the Bank of Ethiopia in 1931 and encouraged the creation of newspapers. Throughout this period, however, there was mounting tensions with Italy, which had occupied Eritrea from the 1890s. This flared into open conflict in September 1935, although the League of Nations exonerated both states. This gave confidence to leader Benito Mussolini, who ordered the full invasion of Ethiopia. This time, still conscious of the defeat at the hands of Menelek's army in 1896 Battle of Ottawa, only 40 years before, the Italians pushed forward with massive resources and extensive use of chemical weapons. By May 2nd, 1936, Emperor Haile Selassie was forced into exile, and in June he went before the League of Nations in Geneva to call international attention to the plight of Ethiopia. It was this speech which both drew Ethiopia to the center stage of world politics for the first time, and at the same time highlighted the impotence of the League of Nations. But World War II was to prove Italy's undoing in Ethiopia and elsewhere. When Italy joined the Axis powers in June 1940, Britain began working with Haile Selassie to remove the Italian forces from Ethiopia. The emperor moved to the Sudan with his son, Crown Prince Asfa Wusan, to coordinate action between his own troops and those of the British. And with an army of British, South African, Ethiopian, and other African forces, Emperor Haile Selassie re-entered Addis Ababa on May 5, 1941. Fighting, however, continued on Ethiopian soil until January 1942. With the end of World War II, the emperor brought Ethiopia into the United Nations as a founding member and greatly expanded the country's diplomatic relations. Domestically, he established a new central judiciary and ensured that the new post-war government was filled with educated ministers with more specific powers. The new judiciary had the task of appointing its own judges, removing them from the hint of political preference. By 1955, Haile Selassie was ready to introduce the new national constitution. It was created through a consensus of input from an Ethiopian educated class which had never before been seen in the country, and which was to a great extent created by the international exposure many Ethiopians had received because of the war. To a great extent, in the post-war era, Ethiopia enjoyed an unprecedented period of relatively uninterrupted stability and progress. It was therefore something of a surprise when a coup d'etat was attempted in Addis Ababa on December 13, 1960, whilst the emperor was abroad in Brazil on a diplomatic mission. While initially appearing to be successful, the coup by the imperial bodyguard, the chief of police, and some radical intellectuals lacked public support. The emperor, on hearing word of the coup attempt, flew immediately to Monrovia, Liberia, then to Chad, and despite trouble on his DC-6 aircraft, on to Asmara, Eritrea. There his son-in-law, General Abibi, was governor, and with the emperor's final return to Ethiopia, the coup was all but over. It collapsed immediately on December 16th. The army and air force and the church had remained loyal to the emperor, but the incident polarized some elements of the society. Attempts at land reform through changes in the tax system failed in Parliament in 1966 because of the grip on Parliament and society by landowners. And the years leading up to 1974 were replete with mounting inflation and corruption and famine. Some elements of the army mutinied on January 12, 1974, and several provinces fell into the hands of mutineers in February. By early June, the mutineers had formed a 120-man Derg committee and initially claiming allegiance to the emperor, but they soon began arresting older politicians and nobles connected with the old order, and in July 1974 demanded a new constitution. The Derg seized the emperor on September 12, 1974, and embarked on a reign of terror not dissimilar to the terror of the Robespierre-controlled First Republic in France in the late 18th century. Civil war ensued, but the emperor died in August 1975 as a result of massive torturing. He was buried in a secret grave, but when the Derg was finally toppled and the grave found, it was discovered that virtually every bone in his body had been broken by his tormentors. Ethiopia reaches her hand unto God. Salam and Afakir, peace and love.